Why would a factory knowingly waste resources in order to produce a bunch of end items that couldn't actually be used by anyone? Now, this seems absurd, and we all know this happens, and there's general inefficiencies in every economy, but in one place in time, there was a particular country where this seemed to be a common plague with respect to their industry. And so they came up with a solution to it. You needed better managers, and you needed better data, and you needed better incentives. All right, well, that all seems to make sense. So what happened next? Well, a manager would come in and they would attempt to provide purpose, direction, and motivation. Purpose is the reason why you're doing something. Direction are the various steps that you're going to take in order to accomplish it. And then motivation is usually a stick or a carrot. If you accomplish this in time, you get rewarded. And if you don't, you get punished. So, armed with this new data and these new processes, this factory receives an order from the central planners at the government, and that order is produce a whole bunch of nails. And so the order comes down and it says, here's your resources and here's the number of nails we want you to produce. The more nails you produce, the more you will be rewarded or punished if you don't do it. So the manager gets to work, right? He's got his marching orders. The marching orders are produce a bunch of nails with the resources that we give you. The trick is that he looks at the resources and recognizes he's probably not going to be able to produce the number of nails that they want. That is if he produces the standard nails. But that's not what the order says. The order just says, produce a lot of nails. So what does he do? Well, he makes a bunch of tiny nails. Technically, he's not wrong, and it is the only way that he can actually make the requirement that he's been given, so that's what he does. Now, the central planners that issued these orders recognizes the problem right off the bat. Clearly, they did not give the right motivation or the right measures of success. So now the measure of success they're going to give changes. It's no longer about producing the most nails. I mean, after all, we don't want a bunch of tiny, worthless nails again. No. Now it's going to be based off of the overall tonnage of nails that you produce. Great, says the factory manager. He ships out his next delivery and no more tiny, worthless nails. Instead, you got a bunch of big, huge nails that you also can't really use. But he is technically made the objective. Now, we can all see what the problem is, and so could the central planners, which is why they would come up with new criteria in order to try to achieve better results. And factories would come up with new ways to achieve the target while creating waste and shortages in the process. And this isn't just an apocryphal story about nails. This is something that used to plague Soviet industry and a whole host of consumer products, everything from coats, shoes, appliances, cars, you name it. Orders would come down, we need more shoes. Factories would respond by saying, fine, we'll make children's shoes because they require less material and it's the only way we can meet our quota. And this is where Goodhart's law comes in. Goodhart's law states that when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. Why is that? Well, because ultimately the steps you use to measure success or progress must be tied to an end state that actually makes sense. When you make the individual steps the measure of success, the end state often gets lost. Now, in market economies, entrepreneurs must constantly anticipate customer needs while managing resources in such a way as to remain efficient. Otherwise, those customers will just go to a different person. But the centrally planned economy doesn't really have competition. I mean, not in any meaningful sense. Centrally planned economies consist of politicians and bureaucrats determining what will be made and with which resources. There are no customers ultimately, at least not any that can choose to go somewhere else. Now, you might say, well, maybe if we just had better data or better management or better surveys, they could fix all of these problems. But that's only half the issue. The incentive structures also don't really exist in the same way they do when someone is risking their own time and money trying to satisfy a customer that is also spending their own time and money. In the centrally planned economy, the government just allocates resources to a factory for a particular purpose. And since customers can't really choose to go anywhere else, you kind of get what you get. And while factories, both in market economies and centrally planned economies, can both come up with bad performance measures and yield negative results, the difference is that in the market economy, if they continue to do that, they go out of business and their competition takes over. But in a centrally planned economy, you can fire all the managers you want. Ultimately, you haven't set yourself up to get that all-important customer feedback loop because they don't have a chance to go somewhere else. So the important thing to remember about Goodhart's law, it's that it's not just about setting proper measures in order to achieve the sort of results that you want. It's about ensuring that you're doing so in an environment where the people that are going to use the things you're producing have options and can give you the feedback you need in order to make sure that you're using the resources you have as efficiently as possible in order to produce something of actual use.